Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness. Your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/set4life today. Secure your future before life makes the choice for you.
Not a good look for our profession.
How in the name of common sense did this ever get this far? Vaccines are not seek and destroy missions.
Because he was so severe.
This is nuts.
One of the top 20 things that she has discovered with her research company, Progenobiome, medicine has been corrupted. Where we go from here now, I don't know. Well, it doesn't work.
So angry. Punishable jail time.
Literally, this makes me believe we live in the Matrix.
Like, deadliest year in U.S. history.
It wasn't a question of if, but when.
This first red.
If it doesn't work and it's safe, put it in a little Fauci Pez dispenser, give it to the patient, and shut the family up.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
He gave Fauci an award for being a hero of the pandemic.
This has been a problem.
These were lies.
Let's talk about the healthcare professionals supporting this.
In the meantime, what was going on behind the scenes?
Irony of the whole thing is,
Harvey's 100% correct.
This is freaking annoying.
Ultimately, we need to have hope for America.
What is going on here? What has poisoned your mind? Buckle up, kids. Welcome, Dr. Giles. I want to start at the very beginning. We want to get to your story because I think that is, the narrative of how somebody gets to where they are and what their profession is very powerful. But first, what is addiction? What is the definition of addiction?
Excellent question. Yeah, first of all, hello, guys. Thanks for having me on your show. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk to your audience. I've been excited about getting on this one. Yeah, what is addiction? There's a number of cool definitions over time. The original meaning, it comes from a Latin word, adicere, which means to sell oneself into bondage. Now, in old times, before there were banks and credit cards and Klarna, buy now, pay later, if you wanted something that you didn't have money to purchase or didn't have the means to acquire, you could go to a wealthy person and borrow money. And so let's say you wanted to open a chariot making business back in Roman times for the circus, but you needed some tools and some woodworking things and some stuff to stretch the hides that you couldn't afford, but you wanted to go into business. You would go to a rich person and say, hey, I want to borrow money for these tools. And I promise I'll pay you back. And if the fellow lent you money, the tools themselves were security interest, but they're not worth very much once they're put into service. So the additional bond was you. So when you borrow the money, if you don't pay it back, you have intrinsic value as a slave. So if you make your payments, retire the debt, everything's fine. If not, you find yourself in, Cyprus in a salt mine or fighting on the Persians or something else. So that's the word, to sell oneself into bondage. And if you think about what happens when you try to get more than is deserved out of a substance, a behavior, right, a routine, then you're selling yourself into bondage. So you get the thing you want now, relief, turning your mind off, whatever you're after with the substance, but you now have a debt to pay. And that debt is with your very self, right? Maybe with your soul, because at some point you're going to have to pay those feelings back. You're going to have to pay back the deferred activity, the things you should have been doing. So that's a technical definition with a historical flavor, adicere, to sell oneself into bondage. I think it applies today too. I think if you think about how substances work or how, right, gambling, you're going to lose and then you're going to owe more than the bet, right? You
Mm-hmm.
you now have to work for the person that you bet against. So that's one. The other one that I really like is activity without progress. Addiction is activity without progress. And if you've talked to somebody who's caught in, let's say, a drinking problem, it takes up an enormous amount of time. It fills the day with getting it, hiding it, managing the hangover, managing the upset family members or coworkers, or the lies you tell yourself. And it's a lot of activity to maintain, especially a late stage substance use problem, but without any progress. Because every day there's that telling yourself you're going to do something different. Nothing changes. One day at a time, starting tomorrow, right? Rather than today. Very powerful. And so those are two of my favorites. But listen, this is my hobby, is this particular field. So we could talk about the definition for a long time. The technical definition from the folks in Washington, D.C. at the National Institutes of Health are a progressive dependence on a substance or behavior that you keep doing despite adverse consequences. So that's the simplest definition, right? Starts to be bad for you, but you keep doing it anyway.
I was thinking to your thing, your definition of activity without progress, which reminds me of some of my years in training at the gym. And I'm like, I'm in there doing these exercises and nothing's getting stronger or better. I'm like, does that mean I'm addicted to the gym? Or is it just...
Well, it might be.
Or some other things we're doing without progress.
Well,
anyway.
no, I remember when I was 21 years old and I took a year off and I moved to Whistler and ran chairlifts for a year. And I would get up. I would get up 45 minutes earlier than all of my comrades. There was 6 of us living in this crappy chalet, but loving every minute of it. And I'd be out running before I would go to work and shovel snow for hours. And I was listening to the Bible on, an old Walkman, and this verse comes up and it says, "You are a slave to whatever has mastered you." And I was like,
fair enough. Yep.
I'm like, why the hell am I running at, 5:45 in the morning when I'm going to be doing exercise all day? And I was like, I think this has mastered me. And now, judging by my knees, that was the case.
May, I talked to a buddy of mine at the gym where I was working out, and I worked out a lot when I was in training, and then having kids and busy with them and stuff, I had let that habit go for a while, and I was back in the gym and I was back in shape, and I've been back for a couple of years, and I was feeling good about it, and it was a very religious routine, if you will. I was there all the time, and there was this guy there, Mike, who was himself a older and a retired professional bodybuilder. And I was getting ready to take a vacation with my family. We were going to go to, I think, Europe for a couple of weeks with the kids. And I was really anxious about that because I had established this addiction or routine or habit. They're all the same. It's the same because it's learning, right? It's all learning. And so I was at the gym and I was doing my thing, and I was nervous about going on this vacation because I was going to lose that progress, and then I was afraid it was going to get derailed. And so I asked Mike, how do you get workouts in? Because the guy was, built like he looked like Zeus on Mount Olympus. Big white beard and the white hair and the kerchief, and he was tan from being on the beach. And he said, "Oh, we're talking about working out when going on vacation?" I said, "Yeah, exactly." He said, I don't do it. I eat what I want to eat. I drink what I want to drink. I sleep in. We go see the museums. My wife and I just enjoy the trip, and I don't try to work out. And this guy looked like muscle beefcake, right? He was fit as hell, and I couldn't believe he would take 2 weeks. And every time I was in the gym, I saw him in the gym, so I knew it was a routine for him as well. And I said, how come you don't work out at all? He said, well, for my workout, it takes 2 hours, and I got to find a gym in Rome or Vienna that has all the stuff that I need in order to work out. And it's usually not near where we're staying. So I've got to get there and back. I've got to get a shower. That's half the day. So that messes up the vacation. And he said, I'm not going to quit working out. So when I come back, I get to build up again. I get to hit it again. It's hard again. And, I've got a challenge, a reason to get back in shape. And I thought, what a mature, sophisticated way of looking at it, right? When you're at work, and when you're off, play. So I don't know. I think there's other things we get at the gym. We get social contact. We get getting out of the house. I mean, that's probably half of why I go to the gym and not in the basement. It's just a place to go to get away and
Right.
and routine and that sort of stuff. So I don't know. You may have gotten more out of it than you think.
I love that because, there's there's so much there. All those fears of, oh, now I got to start over. But although I am the queen of starting over from various orthopedic injuries in life, you know how that goes ups and downs. So
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Well, let's get into your story, if we may. So, well, let's tell everybody, a little bit about your background and how you became a physician with a serious drug problem.
Yeah.
And how that whole story.
So yeah, I probably one of the highlights or key interesting things about me is that I used to be a patient. I'm a doctor, but at one point I was both doctor and patient. And like a lot of patients, I did not want to have the problem that I had. I recognized that I had it, and I didn't want to get help for it, and I avoided getting help for it, which turns out to be true for a lot of maladies, but especially with substance use disorder. So I was a resident. I was a senior resident at a big university hospital. And I had been under enormous pressure from that, self-imposed, most of it from the beginning, with getting into top university and then medical school. And you guys know that whole routine about how hard it is to get in. And then I was in one of the most difficult specialties and one of the most, challenging, but also coveted specialties was anesthesiology. And because of some weird things that were happening in the country, we were very understaffed in the department. I don't know if you remember, there was something called Hillary Care that was being kicked around in the 90s during her husband's presidency. And she was going to fix healthcare by making it all single payer. This is in the mid 90s. And what that did was it scared all of the private practice groups, thinking that the days of them being able to say no or yes to contracts with hospitals and so forth were over. And so they stopped hiring, and they stopped hiring plastic surgeons and ophthalmologists and everybody kind of except primary care. But even those groups were hesitant to hire, and anesthesiology was very hard hit. There were no jobs for the graduates. And so a lot of people in residency said, well, why am I doing a residency in a specialty that there won't be work in when I get out in 2 years or 3 years? So a lot of people dropped out of residency, and we had at least double the workload, plus hiring all these nurse practitioners and so forth. So this is a university hospital where I was essentially working almost by myself. Just, hey, you okay in there? Yep, doing fine. Okay, we'll see you in a half hour. That's how it was. So a lot of pressure, a lot of fun, but I was working really, really long hours. I'd come from a family where substance use disorder was part of it. My dad was an alcoholic, and he had gotten sober right as I left the house, right as I moved out to go to school. And so there's some of that, I'm sure, plays into it, whether it's family history or how I grew up or something. But I remember I was definitely not going to become an alcoholic. I remember saying that. I'm definitely not going to do it like the old man did. But this problem snuck up and bit me in another way, which is one day I was curious about how patients felt on a particular substance, which when I told this story 20 years ago or 25 years ago, when this story takes place, more than 25 years ago, I used to have to repeat the substance. I would say it and people go, what's that? I would say it again and I would have to explain. But now everyone listening and everyone around the world knows about fentanyl. But back then it was a cardiac surgery drug or heavy anesthesia drug. And I made the mistake of thinking that I could control it because of my training or my caution, or because I knew what alcoholism was. And so I wasn't going to do that. But you fool around with substances like that, and very few people are able to just skim across the surface and let that be bygones. And probably the worst thing that happened to me is that it worked. So it worked to give me an hour or two of relief from my thoughts and my self-doubt and my sense of pressure and overwhelm and all that stuff. It sounds silly in retrospect to take that kind of risk with my life over those kinds of things, but when you're caught up in a job, and there was no time out. I didn't think, well, listen, this would be a good time to take a vacation in the middle of residency when we're already overstaffed. So I tried that. It worked. I felt better. And then several weeks later, I tried it again, and it reliably worked. And then if you plot time versus use, the intervals got shorter and shorter and shorter until I could barely wait until the workday was over. So for the last few weeks, for me, it looked like showing up to work, committed that yesterday was going to be the last day, that I was not doing it anymore, being in withdrawal all day long, doing cases, because I wasn't going to use while I was taking care of the patients. And also I was trying to convince myself to just stop. All I had to do was get through the end of the day and then go home and feel bad for one more day. And I'd probably get over the hump, because it's a very short acting drug. And I kept breaking my word to myself. I kept saying that I would do it. And then came 5:00 and access was easy. And I would say, well, I'm just going to do a little bit just to feel not so bad. And of course, I would be right back where I started, day after day after day. Until, go ahead.
I was just going to ask. So at that point, was the barrier mostly mental or physical or both?
Combination, because physically I felt terrible, right? Physically I was in really, really rough shape. If you look at my book called Outsmart Your Addiction, it talks about it, sort of leaps into that last day of what it was like. So physically my body is screaming for some kind of relief. And psychologically, the way I felt at the time was, if I ask for help, all of what I've worked for is over, because there's no recovering from this. There's no way they're going to say, oh, well, you were just off track and now everything's okay. Well, welcome back. You can keep your profession. And, all the, I don't know, 15 years in at that point, plus all the school and time and money and debt and all that stuff I thought it would be over. So I thought if I asked for help, that would be the worst thing that could happen. Mm-hmm. And so every day I was faced with trying to figure that out on my own. So the same thinking that got me into the problem was the one that was trying to, figure it out. So I don't think you could untease those strands. Maybe if I had no physical withdrawal, I would have just stopped, maybe. But remember, the problem with, by the time you get to where I got, people all have two problems. So they've got whatever the substance challenges are, whatever the withdrawal and dealing with that stuff is. And then you still have the reason that you did that in the first place, the reason you started drinking, the reason that you got into the cocaine, the reason that you went to the gym every morning. I don't know, probably not that, but you still got your how you feel about yourself, what your circumstances are, what your situation is, rejection of reality, grief and sadness and comparison, and all of the human foibles are still there. Even if you take the substances away, it's not like they are the actual problem. They're a second problem. They're a solution that turned into a problem for me. So, that's a good question. I'm not sure which it is, but I had both. I had both things going on. And then I got a life-saving page. I got a pager message from my chairman that wound up saving my life, which was, you're not supposed, for the listeners who did not go through residency, the chairman of the department does not talk to the residents very often, except maybe grand rounds, or if you happen to be assigned a case together, and he still did cases. So we had worked together and he knew me. He actually had recruited me into the department out of surgery. I was in surgery first. So we had a nice relationship, but he paged me, and this is right in the middle of one of those terrible days. And So I called back. I first looked on my little card. We used to have these, remember these printed cards with the 4 digits after them, and you could look like, oh,
Yes.
May's paging me to this number. So, I'll call her back. Well, this was a number that was not in my usual routine, and I had to look on the back and finally on the faculty card and figure out it was the chairman. So I knew who I was going to call. It's before phones really and caller ID. This is 1999. And so I'm in my car. And I had broken my word to myself again, just to feel not so sick. I was not intoxicated at that point, because when you do this stuff for long enough, it's just a question of getting maybe back to zero is what I was hoping for. So I was somewhere below zero, still feeling awful, but less awful than right at the end of that case an hour ago. And so he says to me, he says, "Hey, thanks for calling back." He said, "We're not making any accusations, but there's a large amount of fentanyl missing from the pharmacy. And if it's all back by, tonight, then no problem." And so there's my opportunity, right? There's my off ramp. And I said, "Can I come talk to you?" He said, "I was hoping you would say that." And so I drove over to his house, which was the next town over from where I lived. And I just was candid. I just explained all of what'd been going on. He said, "I'm really glad you said that." He said, "Just a couple of years before you got here in the department, we had a resident who died an overdose in the call room at night. And I'd begun to see some of the signs that in retrospect were there, but I didn't know them." And he said, "I'm really glad you spoke up. We're going to get you help. And then you're going to, so you'll be gone for a while, but then you'll come back. And we'll welcome you back here because you're a great doctor and we love having you. And I hope you decide to stay in the department." That's what he said to me while I was in the middle of opiate withdrawal and the worst day of my life, and, sweating and almost throwing up and crying and all that stuff at the same time. It was like catharsis, right? In every sense. And without having a better plan, because I was out of ideas, I said, "Okay." I didn't think it was going to work out. I thought he was shining me on to get me to go do this so that I didn't react. I didn't believe that it was possible that any of what he said would come true.
Wow.
But I didn't want to die, and I didn't have any better ideas.
Wow.
So I took the number, I called, I got involved in a program, and I just started saying yes to what they asked me to do, which was not so much about the substances, but about the rest of the stuff that we're talking about, right? How you see yourself, how you get yourself in that position. And I started saying yes to recovery. I started saying yes to being honest, to asking for help, to not throwing away my career. That was really difficult to think, well, I still want to be a doctor. I had to get down to those roots. And mercifully, I was led on a path 25 years ago, which I'm still on, and it has worked out. Everything they said was true, including going back to the university. The board decided not to count my senior year because I didn't finish it. And then I think because they were nervous, because, the history, they added another year on. So I wound up with an extra year of residency, which was okay. That's fair. And so I stayed and I finished, and I wound up being an anesthesiologist, doing heart surgery and everything else. All of it came true because I started doing things differently. I started acting differently and seeing myself differently. So that's the story. And then I left anesthesia 20 years ago to do this, because this is where my real love is being in the position of my professor, which was to help the light go on for others, right? Help them get through the same challenge that I went through. That turns out to be a better use of my professional life than which it's really fun to work in the OR, but this is actually a whole different kind of fun.
Man, so many questions. And I know obviously you want to talk about the rehab system, the model, what you're doing now, but how, this is just a minor question, but were you married at the time and that you were a resident and using the fentanyl? Did anybody else suspect what was going on?
To the same woman who's still with me now. So she was there for the whole whole catastrophe.
Did she have any inkling what was going on, or did you hide it from her very well?
I hid it from her very well, and it's one of those things where unless you know what you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I said, okay, this is one of those highlights. Remember those things where you had to find the banana and find the wheelbarrow and all those things. If I said, okay, looking here for
highlights. Oh my gosh!
right? Remember that for the resident who's on drugs. Look for the resident who's on drugs. You'd find it. But if you don't know that, someone in your life is on drugs, and you probably would tune up your detectors, your sensitivity, and you probably have a chance at finding them. But if you don't think that, and remember, she was a resident also, so she's busy and exhausted and working every other night call and in surgery and stuff like that. So I don't blame her for not spotting it earlier along the way. And but yeah, she was there. She was there for ground zero. She was there for this terrible conversation where the very next conversation I had after talking with Dr. Moore, my professor, was with her. And I said, okay, here's what's going on. That was tough. And remains, I think, the toughest conversation we've ever had. And interesting about that, at that point, my opinion of myself was lower than whale excrement at the bottom of the ocean. And so I thought I didn't deserve anything good, and she was good. And so I thought, well, this is over. Might as well tell her so she can just, gracefully exit. And she didn't. Now, there's a tinge of codependency in there, I think, which was that she was going to save me and she was going to be the one. And if she loved me enough, then it would be okay. I think that's it. And I think she would probably fess up to that. And that led her on her own journey, which has to do with, stuff that happened in her life. And it's not an accident that she wound up with me. When you look at the antecedents that were in her life before we met. And so we would not have stayed together had she not gone on that journey herself. She just had no substance issues, but she loved a guy who did. And that turns out to be its own problem, its own kind of way of thinking, and thinking you can fix someone or thinking you can manage them into health, which is fine to try and help people, but not if you need to do it in order to be okay yourself, right? As a source of validation.
Correct.
So that was good. And I don't know, maybe because we were just out of ideas, and she's so smart and she's so courageous that she went on that journey herself, which of course doesn't have anything to do with me. I was the fentanyl in that case, right? I was the fella she was in love with, who she couldn't fix. Paradoxically, not trying to fix me, and me not trying to fix me either, because there wasn't anything wrong with me, except I thought there was something wrong with me. That was the actual problem. I was actually fine. My childhood is not even all that interesting or unique, but I sure thought it was. I sure thought it was, and I thought I could fix it. So, yes, she was there and remains there, and talk about having this. Really, you never know, right? So, I mean, I would say this to anyone who only catches this piece of your show. If you're struggling, if you're where I was back then with, I'm going to stop tomorrow. I just have to figure this out. You never know what kind of good things will come when you just wave the white flag, just surrender. So what I got is not only sober and in recovery and began to make sense of myself and my life, but I put back together the relationship with my father, and with the rest of my family. I got to keep, if you will, this girl who we both grew and went through all sorts of therapy and counseling and all that stuff, initially under the guise of help me, but she had her own journey with it also, which then played out in the kids. So our kids wound up with pretty together parents having, right. And they know the stories, and there's nothing to hide with them. So what I would say is don't cheat yourself a chance at a better life because of your limited thinking. That's what I had. I had very limited thinking I had to manage it all myself and keep it all a secret. And that turned out to be not just not true, but in the way of a beautiful life. I mean, a really spectacular life. So it may look bleak. It's not. You're just right around the corner from some challenges in the beginning, but if you stick with it, my experience is it gets great.
America spends more on healthcare than any other country, yet we rank 48th in life expectancy. We spend trillions, but 200,000 insured people still declare medical bankruptcy every year. Clearly, the system is broken. But what if there was a way to take back control, to break free from inflated costs and red tape? That's exactly why Crowd Health was created, a smarter, more transparent way to pay for healthcare. No middleman, no bureaucracy. Just a community of people helping each other when it matters most. Join the revolution. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use promo code BSFREE for a discount on your first 3 months, because your health should be in your hands, not theirs. Well, May and I just had this discussion this morning, which was really fascinating, on how sometimes things like addiction, May had an eating disorder after being abused as a elementary school student. We've talked about it lots on the podcast, so it's not, a secret. But sometimes these dysfunctional behaviors are actually blessings in disguise. Because it actually makes you, like, you're either going to die, like with a fentanyl addiction, you're either going to die or you're going to confront the problem. And if you really confront the problem, you get to the root and you pull the roots out. Now you have a chance at a life that you would have never had before if you would have never been addicted, but still had that root there.
The weird paradox, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a very weird paradox. Whereas, we were talking about people that we know that don't have an obvious, drinking problem, eating disorder, morbidly obese, like whatever it is. But they have these unbelievably dysfunctional relationships and dysfunctional patterns of behavior because their coping mechanism is seen as something positive. So
like fixing other people,
right?
Work.
Work.
So can you imagine? Can you imagine if instead of saying, "Hey, we're going to help you and we're going to help you get clean because we love you and you're a great doctor," how about every single time you used fentanyl, somebody patted you on the back and said, "There you go, man. You're the man." Like, I feel sorry for those people.
They did for a while, not because I was using fentanyl, but because, I did in that shortened year where I wound up leaving and then coming back later, I did 50 heart cases by myself.
So you're Superman.
As a resident. Yeah. I did 20 liver transplants, essentially by myself. So I was on the roof with the trauma team bringing in the ruptured aortas. And that story that I tell in the beginning of the book is an aorta rupture case that we're doing. So the rewards that I got from the complexity and from the essentially being junior faculty as a resident, because of the shorthandedness and because I was good at it and I had good training, was I felt in some ways entitled to that. Like, this is how I'm managing my stress of doing, even though I loved it. I mean, a steady diet of that. If we had back-to-back livers, except for being totally exhausted, I loved it. The harder it was, the more involved it was, the more challenging. Weirdly, the less I leaned on any kind of substances or anything like that, because the work itself was very, it filled up all my thoughts. Right? You're dealing with somebody you put a box of blood into in order to keep them from exsanguinating during a liver transplant, because there's no clotting factors. There's not a lot of time to feel sorry for yourself or think about other stuff or my poor me with my crummy childhood or or any of that stuff. It's just you're just going. So you're absolutely right, Tim. I think, and this may be a subtlety about addiction, is that we figure out a way to make it rewarding in other dimensions. So the guy with the gambling habit who's at the racetrack and he knows all the trainers and it's his whole lifestyle of being at the track, or the wine collector who's got the cellar and the special tastings and flies to these different places for the grand cru, this and that. No, I'm not a wino. I have a wine cellar. And so sometimes we'll add a bunch of embellishments and accoutrement and lifestyle so that the underlying. So I knew a guy who, billionaire, who was extremely successful in business, but his family is a catastrophe, and it's because he's never present. Whenever they're even together, he's on the phone doing a deal in some other country, some other big thing, some other massive enterprise, and no peace. But his justification for it is he's doing it all for them. I had a surgeon when I was in training. I wound up looking at, he's gone now, pioneer, legendary, famous surgeon in the field, was one of my professors. And I remember when I was a resident in surgery, getting called down to the ER to see his daughter who had appendicitis. And we were all enamored of this. I mean, he was a living legend in surgery, and descended from Halsted, right? He was one of Homan's students. So Halsted, Homan, this guy, he created 911. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and so I got called to do the admit in the ER for his daughter who had appendicitis. She was in her 20s, so at the time a contemporary, and I didn't understand any of this stuff. And so I was talking to her about her medical issues, but also about her family and how great it must have been to have him he had, I think, 6 or 7 kids. How great it must have been to have him as her father. How, awesome that must be. Because my dad was an alcoholic, and this guy was helping, right? Millions of people probably downstream. And she said, I don't see it that way. I said, what do you mean? She said, was never home for Christmas, never home for one of my birthdays or any of the kids, my siblings' birthdays. My mother's birthday, we never took trips. There was never a time at home when it was just a family together before the phone would ring and he would leave. So that's back when I was a resident. And that had something to do with me leaving surgery, honestly, was that conversation, because I knew that I didn't want that. I didn't want that legacy of everyone at work thinks I'm great, but everyone at home knows that's not true. That's not something that I wanted. So I think you're absolutely right. I think there are drugs that we get rewarded for, or behaviors or routines, or work being maybe the top one, but there's a lot. I mean, religion, suffering. I have a friend whose job is suffering. That's it. He's a professional sufferer. Mm-hmm. And why don't you do things differently? Oh, but that's just exactly what they want you to say. Like, oh my God. And so, yeah.
I want to know stuff. When how was that for you to go back to residency in anesthesia with the temptation right there? Because for a lot of people, it's like, okay, I'm going to not go to the bar anymore and hang out with my same friends because I was at Cheers, alcoholic at the local tavern. I'm not going to set foot in a casino. For a lot of people, the boundary sets are easier. I'm curious on your answer because, my addiction struggle with food, the eating, I mean, you can't not eat. So how was it for you to go back and choose to go back to anesthesia, having those drugs right in front of you?
You already know the answer. Food I think is really, really tough. Or food or sex or, things that exercise, things that we're supposed to do. You're supposed to do, but people can definitely overdo them. I won't even say overdue. It's sometimes just have a maladaptive relationship. So it's not
Correct.
overeating. It could be undereating or orthorexia, or could write different things. And yeah, so they were really worried about that. The department, the board, the anesthesiology, American Board of Anesthesiology was worried about it. The university, not the university. I don't think I was of any interest to the University of California, but I was of interest to the Department of Anesthesiology. Right. And for them, they for many of them, not all, fortunately, but for many of them, they saw it only as risk. Like, why would you go back to the front lines when you could step on a mine or get shot or fall off something? So for many, it seemed like an unnecessary risk, and I understand that. There was a theory going around at the time. This is again 25 years ago or 30 years ago. That here's how the theory goes. In the operating room, we usually will put a breathing tube in a patient for general anesthesia, and then we add some stuff that's kind of a cousin to ether, and they stay unconscious while the surgery goes on, and then you turn off that vaporizer, it's called, that lets the medicine in through the breathing tube, and they wears off, and they wake up, and you pull out the tube, and surgery's over. There are all kinds of seals and vacuum systems to keep that gas from getting in the room. You would not want it to just be loose in the room, and the surgeons would be sleepy, and the nurses would be passed out, and so you have to contain the gas. There was a theory running around and they do a good job of it, and nitrous and so forth. There's other gases in the operating room. There was a theory at the time that fentanyl, which we use routinely in most surgery because it's great short-acting pain medication, put in the patient's IV, and it wears off, and it's usually gone by the time they wake up. That the fentanyl would somehow volatilize in the room, that it would come out of the breathing tube, or would come out of the patient's wound or the surgery site, and here's how it goes. Breathing in the volatilized fentanyl in the room would reactivate the addiction, because it's basically, puppet strings, and if the chemical's in your system, it's over. Right. And believe it or not, there was a paper that came out not long before I was supposed to go back to the OR, or was working on going back to the OR, that although they had no evidence that anyone had ever re-succumbed to their problem, they were able, using mass spectroscopy, to measure these tiny molecules of fentanyl in the room. They're like, why would you go back? Look, this is it. You're walking back into a cloud of fentanyl.
Like hotboxing the fentanyl in the OR.
Yeah,
I don't know. Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, exactly. Free laps, right? Walking on the streets of New York, where there's clouds of marijuana now, or everywhere.
Yeah,
many places. So anyhow, that was the fear at the time, and really what it translated into is they didn't want to lose me. I had come. Right, that's where they were coming from, and maybe to be less generous, they didn't want to be the ones responsible for me dying or hurting a patient. Honestly, hurting a patient is what their main concern was: public health. So I remember the conversation, and it dragged on, and it probably dragged on for an extra year of this back and forth, until I was about 3 years in the program, sober, and sober with proof, because we had to be tested all the time and observed and monitored and whatever. And there was I only found this out afterwards. There was a big debate in the department at the university, at the hospital. There's a big department debate about whether or not to let me back. And it was kind of like the Senate 50-50, and the vice president cast a deciding vote. It was kind of like that. Because why take a risk? Why take a risk with my life? Why take a risk with the reputation of the department? Why take a risk with a patient if I was not totally solid? And I understand that, and I don't fault them for it. But fortunately, the deciding vote was cast for me to return, and I went back. And yes, it was really weird, but not because I was around the substance. Something happened to me in the process of that. Of the recovery journey, that my relationship to the substances changed. So my relationship to fentanyl was different. My relationship to all substances had changed. and it wasn't a white knuckling experience. It wasn't gripping the front rail of the roller coaster and hoping to get through the day. It wasn't that anymore. It was, these were tools. They had resumed their proper place in the tool drawer, and by then I had a wife. We'd gotten married not long after I got sober, but then I had a wife. I had a child. I had only a little bit of time left. I had all these, to finish. I had all these people counting on me, and I also had the fresh memory of all the misery. So there was no way that I would trade the grace that I had been given for, a few minutes of misery on my way back to hell. So there was just no chance that I would do that, and didn't, and went through and got through it and got through the whole thing, and paid off. I paid off on all of the trust and all of the second chance and all of the support and all the love and all of the grace. So, yeah, but they were worried. They were really worried.
I was thinking more about you.
I have the most to lose. I'm the least worried in this story because I knew that I was different. I knew that I had changed as a result of that. But I'll say one last thing about it. In the beginning of making that kind of change in life, from leaning on substances and keeping secrets, and from that kind of Saul of Tarsus reversal in terms of living life to living life a different way, like I said, I had a lot to lose, and I didn't want to lose it. And for a little while before I went back, I was very anxious about, well, what if I don't stay sober, and what if I change my mind, and because at that point I had a lot of people counting on me 2 years in, and I got a little magic from a conversation I had with another fella in the group. I said, I'm worried about this. I'm 2 years in. I don't want to go back, but what if I screw up, and what if I mess up and find myself back there? I was very irrationally afraid of that, as if I weren't in control of myself. And he said, well, what's the secret? How is it? How are you able to stay sober this whole time? And I said, well, I show up and I go to meetings and I tell the truth and I ask for help. He says, do you think if you keep doing that, you'll keep staying sober? I said, well, so far so good. He said, well, just keep doing that. And literally nothing changed. That my routine was the same. My history is the same. The only thing that changed was that I stopped worrying about it. I just stopped worrying about it and just kept going. So I had a whole other year. By the time I went back, I knew I would be fine. Not in a smug way, like, oh, I've done with that and I don't have a problem anymore, but that I was confident that I would keep doing what I needed to do in order to keep having the life I was living.
Okay, so the thing that has hit me the hardest in your story is the grace that your professor showed you. Because our personal experience and the experience of most of our contemporaries, and I think we're about the same age, we graduated in 1992 from medical school, and I'm
in my very late 30s.
Good for you.
Yeah, so are we.
And I'm not turning 60 in 6 weeks, but at any rate, so the experience that we've interviewed, because we went through this major divorce from a group we were with for 25 years. It's a huge story. We won't get into that here. We thought it was just us, like we were bad people or whatever. And then it happens. We've interviewed doctors from all over the country and all over the world. And I can tell you, in American medicine, there is no grace left. I like, if this happened to you in 2025, they would just ejection seat you, and that would be that. And they would plug and play probably somebody with a fraction of your knowledge and experience into the position, and they would be happy because they wouldn't have to pay them as much as they were paying you. So it's a win-win. Right. We got rid of the problem, we got rid of the risk, and we plug in a nurse anesthetist, and everyone's happy.
We save some money. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the patients will never know the difference. So yeah, we're ahead. Yeah, exactly.
So we see that over and over and over again, which sets up your business. The segue into what you're doing now, which is, if you're a physician that is an addict or is contemplating, hey, maybe I need to do something about my drinking or whatever, my gambling, like take your pick. Stuff you can hide. You can hide gambling. If you make decent money, you can hide drinking. You're never going to go to a 12-step program if you got to tick the damn box on a licensing form or an insurance form that says that you were treated for a substance abuse. Like you're not going to do it. If you're highly functioning and you see yourself as highly functioning, even if you're kind of like, my wife's kind of pissed, and you're not going to tick that box,
Right.
You know, because you got way too much to lose. And as physicians, we have this little tiny narrow thing that we can do. I mean, I don't have a business degree. I can't go run Pepsi. You know,
Right.
I can diagnose and treat pneumonias all day long, and that's what I do. I'm pretty damn good at it, but I'm not really super good professionally at anything else. And so tell us about, what you're doing in really kind of stopgapping some of that and actually treating professionals, people that do have a tremendous amount to lose if they don't get this problem under control.
So there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Talking about the corporatization or the private equitization of medicine. That is that we can have a whole show on that. We have probably
we'll bring you back for that because although unfortunately that will probably drive me to drink, so that's probably not a good thing.
That
We'll talk through it. You'll be okay.
Yeah,
I
love it.
So there's that risk management, absolutely, and I don't know. I don't know how my now wife knew that it would work out, but we got married. I was only a few months sober, and she saw something. She saw that something had changed, and she was right. She saw it before I did. My professor took a risk, I suppose. In retrospect, he didn't take any risk at all. And I think and this is a guy who does calculated risk for a living, right? He's a MD, PhD, chairman of the department at a university medical center. So he's really good at assessing risks. And he thought I was a good bet. So I think, I'm not sure. I think there's still lots of grace out there. I think, grace is divine, unmerited assistance. And I may be wrong about the unmerited part, right? I may have messed up my accounting of whether or not I was deserving of that, because maybe I was. I just didn't think I was at the time. In retrospect, tens of thousands of patients later that I've had something to do with their particular sobriety journey, I think that was the best possible thing that could have happened. Was that, and I think that him getting behind that was like buying Apple stock in 1990. That would have been really, really, really smart. So, but I didn't feel that way at the time. I felt like I was a buggy whip manufacturer in 1990, and no one was buying what I was selling. I was just wrong about that. About the about the guy who doesn't want to come forward because he's afraid of losing things. That turns out to be generalizable beyond medicine. So of the people with a substance use disorder in some form or another in this country, it's probably between 50 and 70 million people. If you expand that to food and sedentary lifestyle and other bad habits, it's, everybody's got something, I will say. Mm-hmm. And the guy who has no other career prospects except to continue reading EKGs and doing cardiology, but he's, went from a glass of wine to two bottles, and he's hungover when he comes in the morning, but afraid to ask for help because he'll lose his mandate and get kicked out of the group and all the rest of that stuff. That's legitimate, and that's real. And that was the beginning of the physician wellness movement, kind of at the end of the 70s, that blossomed in the 80s in California into the physicians diversion program, which I was fortunate enough to become a member of, around this time that this story began. As it happens, the doctor programs for doctors with substance use disorder, they have the highest success rate of any substance use or honestly any
Really?
addiction intervention, the highest in the world, in history, anywhere. The going success rate for something like residential treatment or detox and then a few days in counseling and that kind of stuff, the bread and butter of the addiction treatment industry, success rates are below 20%. They're probably in the teens, and they may be in the single digits. It's very difficult to get good information, and by that, the success is defined as abstinence, as permanent abstinence or abstinence for 5 years or more. So very low. Most people who go, it doesn't stick, and so as a result, most people don't go. It's only about 5%, between 4 and 6% of people who definitely need to get substance use treatment. Definitely, only about 1 in 20 goes at all. So it isn't just doctors, because the doctors are not that many as a percentage of the country. It's everybody. Everybody's afraid for the same reasons you said. They don't want anyone to know. They don't know what to do next. They're afraid they can never drink again. They don't want anyone finding out about all the rest of the stuff. What are they going to say to the kids? Well, how am I going to take off 30 days from work? There's a lot of friction to getting help besides just the professional class, right? You're a judge, and that's going to look bad if you go off to rehab, because what about all the cases, and were you drunk on the bench, and what, right? So that it opens up all kinds of problems. Malpractice concerns and mandate in the group, and maybe that guy's been trying to get me out anyway, and this is his chance because of this, and so the stakes are high to getting help. They're even higher for not getting help. So it's a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation still. So what I tried to do in my boutique phase of my career, which is helping the very famous and the very high powered folks, is try and give them what I got, which is this longitudinal program, this 360-degree, fully immersive becomes part of your life. Recovery becomes part of your life rather than something you're passing through until you can get the heat off and get back to normal. That's why it's successful. It's not successful because, and I had a chance a couple of years ago to talk to the president of the board of boards, so the Federation of State Medical Boards, which is the parent organization of all 50 medical boards, or Puerto Rico also in the U.S. territories. They all have medical boards, and the medical boards are all part of an organization, and they nearly all have diversion programs in them. And so I asked her, what is it? Because everyone thinks it's the license. If you don't toe the line, then they'll take away your ticket and you can't practice medicine. And I think that does make a difference in the very beginning, but it's not a reason why you stay for 5 years. And it's not a reason why you stay sober for 5 years after that, or for 20 years after that. There's no way that it's the license. It's because your life changes. It's because you had a chance for the grace to take root. You had a chance to, on a consistent basis, behave differently. And that's where your life changes, right? When you over and over again don't pick up the drink to deal with your feelings, you get in a habit of not drinking because of your feelings. So what I tried to do with a little handcrafted stuff, where we put together all these treatment people and counselors and therapists for your listeners know these people. They're the most famous people in the world that I was fortunate enough to be able to help. I figured out that the key, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, the key is to actually care. That's the key. The key is to actually care about the person you're trying to help. And weirdly, the way that I'm most able to help is not because of I went on to get boards 2 different times in addiction medicine. So I've got the paper that says I know what I'm talking about, but nobody cares about that. They care that I went through it. They care that it's all true. They care that there's hope. They care that I care. They care that my staff cares. The people that see the patients are seeing patients right now while we're talking. So that's what moves the needle. That's what makes the difference. And if your imaginary case that you just presented of a guy who needs to get help but is afraid to get help and what's going to happen, if that guy can connect with someone else who's been through it and who cares and also can convey that genuine concern, that person's got a shot. So like I said a minute ago, it's not the end. As bad as it looks, and this group, and what's going to happen, and I can't be a doctor. None of that matters. I mean, literally none of it's going to matter, because we're going to go to your funeral if you keep on doing what you're doing. So that's the actual other side of the coin, is your death. You're going to lose everything. You're going to lose the right to practice. You're going to lose your family. You're going to lose your self-respect. You're going to lose those things anyway. So you might as well wave the flag, ask for help. And then what we try to do in the company is we try to bring what I got, right? So we try to bring the very best, the very latest. Most everyone in the company is in recovery himself, and if you add has a family member in recovery, it's everybody. So everybody has firsthand personal experience with this, from either being a patient or patient adjacent. And then I'm at the conferences all the time. We try and be the very latest and up to datest on the ways to help people through detox and early recovery. And we're very fortunate. We are in several states, helping the best programs in the country manage their medical care. This is one of the outgrowths of, I think, the lockdown times, is that we get to do this, right? We don't have to be in the same studio having a podcast. You don't have to be in the same room with a patient. You can do it virtually. And so we bring our staff by telemedicine to the different treatment centers, but apply the same principles, right? Same principles: care, do the best, listen, and it's working.
I have a question, like generally about rehab and therapy and treatment programs. I mean, and this might be too difficult for an answer, short of doing a whole episode on it. But I mean, how do you separate or define what's going to work best from, AA programs to like outpatient based therapies to fully inpatient based? Is it 2 weeks, a month? I mean, you heard of Betty Ford. There's treatment centers everywhere.
Sure.
Like, there's so many different models, and there's sort of the one size fits all thing that obviously doesn't work either. So can you sort of shake up and kind of compare the different models and what works
Sure.
for who?
That's a great question. Yeah, because people at home are like, what do you do? And that's, listen, by the way, you asking that question as a physician asking that question is pretty impressive, because what happens a lot of times, this is a primary care conversation, right? So the setting is a patient sitting on the crinkly table paper on the exam table, and you're in the rolly chair with the chart, or sitting at the computer, and you're doing the review of systems, and you get to the social history and you ask, do you drink? And the patient says, well, my wife thinks I drink too much, which, by the way, has a 100% sensitivity. Mm-hmm. So if patients say that,
oh boy, let's just pull the plug on this episode. No, I'm
100%. And it's true not just for drinking, but it's true for health problems and stuff. My wife says that I'm short of breath when I come up the stairs. Or my wife says that I should talk about my chest pain. Or my wife says my legs are swollen. 100% sensitivity. That study just came out 2 weeks ago. So if you come in with your spouse with the pitchfork, then it's because it's true, right? So if for the docs out there or the patients out there, and your wife is on you or your spouse is on you. Anyhow, so my wife thinks I drink too much, which is a way of not owning it, right? Saying, mm-hmm. Well, how do I get this lady off my back?
Correct.
And so unfortunately, a lot of physicians have no training or expertise in this particular field. You might as well have asked about, cochlear hair cells. And it's like,
right. You know, to ask the question, but now you're like, now what do I do with this?
Now what do I do? And so this happens. This is happening a million times a day in America. This conversation, or they see something, or there's LFTs are irritated, or the number 2 cause of hypertension is alcohol withdrawal. So they, stop drinking, show up, high blood pressure, come back next week. They stop drinking, high blood pressure. Oh, this must be essential hypertension, but it's not. Patient never brings it up. So very, very, very common in the primary care office. It's probably responsible for maybe a quarter of the visits in a primary care office is something to do with substance use disorder, somehow connected to that. So wife says I drink too much. The doc doesn't know what to do, because you don't know. Cholesterol we're very good at, right? Oh, here's the number. That means you need this medicine. Oh, you tried this medicine, that you need this other medicine. Oh, it's just triglycerides. You need this medicine. We're really good at that. Blood pressure, really good. The substance use disorder question, what do you say? You should go to meetings, I guess. Here's a little thing for AA. Go to that. Well, what is AA? I don't know, right? The doc doesn't know.
No.
Talk to your pastor. Talk to your rabbi. Talk to your priest. What do I say to him? Well, tell him that your wife thinks you drink too much. I mean, how do you make a referral to clergy from being in, which may be the best thing to do, by the way, but right. What
about the cage questions? How good are those?
What about
that's what we were taught.
Cage questions are great, but then what? Let's say the person, so cut down. And they each have their own sensitivities.
Right.
Eye opener being the most sensitive. Eye opener is 100% sensitive. So if you have a drink first thing in the morning to get by, you have an alcohol use disorder, no question about it. But annoyed is one of the more subtle ones. Or you've been annoyed by people asking you about saying something about your drinking. That turns out to be like a backdoor way of getting in there, which is what my wife says I drink too much. So but let's say the guy doesn't say my wife says I drink too much. Let's say he says, I think I drink too much. So there's no doubt we're not making a diagnosis here. You're just figuring out the treatment. What's the right dose of treatment for a guy who says I drink too much? So does he need to go to the hospital? Well, maybe. If he's yellow, probably. Does he need to go to residential treatment? Well, think about it. Most people don't want to go. It's super expensive. It's very disruptive. You don't want to go when you had maybe went fishing and you had, killed a 12-pack of beer with your friends. That may not be the reason to go to rehab. But if you're fishing every day, well, different story. So it's tricky. And then what do you do for follow-up? So you say, okay, well, you should go to AA. And AA is a mutual help organization of people who've been through it, and listen with an open mind. You don't have to say anything, just participate in terms of listening to it. Read their textbook and see if the stories in there fit with you, and then come back and we'll discuss it. So if you have a primary care doc or an internist who's got that awareness, that might be the best intervention. That's a chance for them to think about it. But listen, 50% of docs don't think this is a real problem. They think the solution is, well, just have some willpower.
Or even family members who might be having this discussion.
But I think that there's more. I think there's more to that. I think that 50% of docs don't think this is a problem because they may have a little bit of the problem.
And don't catch me saying the docs may have the problem, but yeah, you're right. The docs may have the problem.
Yeah.
And it's it's like, hey, it's super easy to judge a heroin addict because I never used heroin.
Right.
But have I gone to work hungover? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of a sudden it's a completely different paradigm, right? I mean, we had a pastor that used to always say the line of acceptable behavior is 2 inches behind my heels. In other words, I would never do meth, but a little bit of heroin is okay. You know what I mean? Like the line is always in our favor. Always in our favor. And so
go, sorry to interrupt, but to go back to I was thinking just the physician asking, even family members, it's like, so you have this interventional meeting or whatever, the doctor finally asked, but then what do you do with it?
So it fortunately there's a rubric. So the American Society of Addiction Medicine has put together a rubric to figure out what the proper dose is. And there are a couple of kind of interesting, clever things in there, which is the more you fight it, the more you need it, right? So if you're like, I think this is a serious problem, and I'd like to get as much help as possible so I don't take down my own life and the life of the people I care about, that person's probably in much better shape in terms of insight. Because as I've said, you can put 20 addiction experts in a room talking to somebody who no doubt is an alcoholic, and it will bounce off, right? They don't care. They're like, well, that's what you say, and that's what you say, and that's what you say, but I know better, and it's my life. Like you say, 2 inches behind my heels. Mm-hmm. I was reminded of, in your story, I was reminded of George Carlin, God rest his soul, who used to say, anyone on the freeway who drives faster than me is a maniac. And anyone driving slower than me is a jerk, right?
Yes, so, exactly.
But it's like that. It's compare and despair. And the doctors don't look at it objectively for lots of reasons, right? There's an off ramp in that uncomfortable conversation. My wife thinks I drink too much. the doc can say, well, try to cut down. And then that's the end of the conversation. You've shut down the bid for connection and ask for help. You don't have to deal with referrals and whatever else. And you basically let them know, listen, this is not, we don't talk about that here. This is not, we don't manage lifestyle habits. And we're growing out of that in primary care and in other specialties. We recognize that most illness is lifestyle illness, if you will. But yeah, it's quite common because you don't know what to say next. You don't know what to say. You don't want to send this guy to rehab if that's not the right dose of the intervention. You don't want to. Maybe he needs to go to counseling, but you're not familiar with what that is and what that world is. Maybe he just pulled his wife out of the pool and that's why, right, his back is sore. So there's different reasons for it, and it's the kind of thing where if you can slow down and put down your pen and have a conversation as a human being, not as a doctor-patient, then you've got a much better shot at connecting with the person, because ultimately it's going to be up to him or her in this conversation who goes forward, takes the next step. And back to my story, I was lucky to have this sympathetic professor, but I could have blown off the suggestions. I could have blown off the recommendations. At one point I was dithering, I knew that I needed to get help from a substance use standpoint, but I wasn't sure if maybe this is all in my book, but maybe it was medicine was the problem. That's where I was. I was thinking, well, maybe it's because I didn't have this kind of problem before I became a doctor. That's what my thinking was at the time. And so we're confused when we come in. The patient asking it is not me with 2.5 decades of recovery saying, well, my wife thinks that you've got somebody who's bewildered and confused and minimizing and maybe is looking for the doctor to say, hey, just tell me to cut back. That's really all I want to hear from you, because I got to go back to my wife and tell her that I talked about it and I want her to, know that I heard her, but you just say, cut down, right? And yeah, that's it. Cut down. Try not to drink so much. Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
I talked to him about it. He said I should just cut back, right?
Tick that box. Mm-hmm.
Right. And that means not drink so much in front of you, maybe. That's what cut back means. So the answer to your how do you know where to go is the ASAM criteria. So American Society of Addiction Medicine. Basically, if you're drinking around the clock or if you're having withdrawal symptoms that you treat with the substance, so the 6 dimensions. Physical is the first one. Medical, so is this affecting the rest of your health? Psychological or psychiatric is the third one. And then the rest of it has to do with your living circumstances, your willingness to change, and then social factors, resources, wherewithal, that kind of stuff. And so you can go to asam.org and go on there and go, yeah, I'm drinking around the clock and I, turning yellow and I've got a big belly from my cirrhosis. And those are easy diagnoses to make. Right. The guy who drinks 2 cups of punch at the Christmas party and doesn't drink the rest of the year, but he's racked with guilt about the second cup of punch. Those are easy. You don't need treatment. You just need to maybe not have the second cup of punch. But the ones in between where you're trying to figure out what's the severity here, and the way that's set up is for it should be separate from location. So it's not if you're in bad shape, you only go to the hospital. You go to the hospital for medical things. You're in some sort of treatment where you need to be monitored for medical reasons. As soon as you're not sick enough to require nursing around the clock or monitoring around the clock, then you can be in an outpatient setting. And that's probably where most people would wind up, is in some kind of education, community, and accountability. Those are the 3 ingredients. You got to learn what your problem is. You got to be around other people who've been through it so that you can see, okay, I'm not the pariah that I thought I was. And then someone's got to keep an eye on you, because we make promises in the morning that we don't fulfill in the afternoon. So there's got to be some way to be accountable to the process.
Which I find fascinating, because I've always kind of chafed at this concept of, I haven't had a drink in 40 years, but I'm still in recovery. Like, to me, that kind of sounds dumb. But then at the same time, I don't know how many times on this show I've talked about how ritual saves you. Ritual saves you. You brush your teeth because it's a ritual. You would never say,
Right.
I brushed my teeth 25 years ago and now I'm going to quit brushing my teeth because I've recovered from brushing my teeth.
You've recovered from your cavity, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, or going to the gym, I used to go to the gym. I'm finished, like, of course not. Ritual is what saves you. It's why, in religion, you have these rituals because they remind you, they ground you. And so if you had something as life-changing as a substance problem, why wouldn't you keep practicing what worked in the first place? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
actually common
Exactly.
sense when you break it down in that regard. Because I've always kind
Yeah.
of, I listen to Glenn Beck and he's like, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm like, dude, you haven't drank since like the, Carter administration. I don't know that counts anymore, but I guess it
Right.
does.
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. It's a really good point. Yeah. How long are you an ex-smoker? Right. I mean, probably forever. And, it is interesting. It's interesting. At the beginning, we were talking about the guy who's too afraid because of the consequences, or too embarrassed because of the professional harm to come forward and ask for help. People with a substance use disorder that's active, they don't like talking about it. It's not what they lead the conversation with, right? At dinner parties and so forth, or at the bus stop. But people who've been through it, you can't get them to shut up. They go on
Right.
podcasts. Right? So they will tell you over and over again how they used to have a drinking problem, how they used to have a fentanyl problem. And I think that's human nature also. And I think I'll just speak for everybody. We do it for a couple of reasons. One is to be a beacon so that others maybe have hope. They recognize they're not trapped. But also, as you say, as a ritual, as a reminder, right? As a reminder. A friend of mine who's sober a million and a half years, he says the thing about alcoholism, which is not about alcohol, it's about this thinking that we're talking about, this not good enough thinking. The thing about alcoholism is the abyss follows you. So no matter how great it gets, no matter how many millions of reasons you have to stay sober, it's always sort of right, just out of reach, but not too far out of sight. This notion that maybe you're still not good enough, or maybe those vague doubts are still there. Lewis talks about the doubts are how he knows, that's how he sustains his faith, because of the doubts. So that the doubts never go away, the notion never goes away, and the proclamation of I'm a recovered alcoholic, or I used to have a drinking problem, or I used to have a substance use problem. I think that's okay. I don't mind it, but remember, the experience applies to that person. It's not that any one of us loses our clay feet, or that we know what's best for you. We can just tell you what we did, what worked for us. I will say one thing about that. When I listen, I thought it was all nonsense and silly. And I heard a guy in a meeting say that he was 20 years sober. When I walked in there, he said, I haven't had a drink in 20 years. And I, at the time, I was in my own 20s at the time. I was a kid. I said to myself, well, how bad could it have been if you didn't drink for 20? I couldn't get 20 days. I couldn't get 20 hours, right? So how bad could it have been if you didn't have a drink for 20 years? His problem must be different than mine. Now, here I am at the other end of that. Now I'm the old timer with all that time. And I know what he meant, which is it's all one day at a time, right? All of it is one day at a time. And the accumulated residue of making those daily choices, that's what your life is. It's the sum total of all of your choices. And so, yeah, I think rituals are super important. I think they're the graph paper that life occurs on. I think they're the framework. They're grounding. They're a reminder that the whole world works on, right? The ritual of the sunrise, the ritual of the seasons, the ritual of getting hungry in between meals, and all of that stuff. Since there were tides and we were jellyfish, everything is in a cycle. Everything is in a rhythm. And by the way, if you're hurting right now, it's important to remember that tough times don't last, right? They don't stay tough forever, even though it seems like I'm never getting out of this. This is always going to be tough. Everything is cyclical. Everything is in a rhythm. And if we can swim with the rhythm, well, everything's a lot better than trying to fight the tide.
Well, and like I've said this, I actually wrote a Substack about it when I was learning to kite surf, which I guess I still am because you never stop learning. But it's the fact that everything sucks until it doesn't. And
Yes.
and that's really, really important. The other thing along that line, when you talk about willpower, is when you make your mind. I heard this guy talking about this, and it really blew me away because I go, it's exactly right. Once you've made a decision, you don't need willpower. You only need willpower when you think that you're not sure what you're going to decide. And,
Yes.
and that's, it's like, once you're out of bed driving to the gym, the willpower is over. You're going to the gym. The willpower is when you're in bed going, maybe I'll stay in bed. That's when you need willpower.
Yes. Marcus Aurelius talked about that, being in bed in the covers, and right. And was it Paulo Coelho said, ships are safest in the harbor, but that's not what ships were built for.
Right.
So we have to get out and do it. It's funny you talked about the gym. When I tell people who don't want to work out, I say, well, you don't have to work out every day. You can decide whether or not you want to work out. But the way to do that is in your gym clothes at the gym. Get out at the gym, ready to work out, and then say, I don't know if I feel like working out today. After you're already there, you're going to work out. But don't let the guy in bed decide, because he's not going to work out.
That's very
is
wise.
I mean, we could talk to you for hours, as we could with a lot of our guests, because this is really fascinating. We talk about, maybe we'll get you to come back and we'll do an episode on big rehab, because I remember I was sitting on a quality assurance committee for some insurance companies, and we had these kind of pop-up rehab centers that were doing like telemedicine rehab, but then they had to get approvals for drug testing. Well, they were drug testing people every other day, and just billing the system, billing the system $400, $500, $600 a test. All it was a front for fraudulent testing.
Yes.
So this came to us, and I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. So there's look, it's a human endeavor that has to do with money. So there will be corruption at times.
For sure. I hate that personally. I personally am on a mission to get rid of that, because I just had a conversation with a medical director of one of the big five insurance companies. I was at a conference. I wound up getting introduced to this fella, and there's a scourge is really the best way to say it in the treatment industry of people selling patients from one facility to another. There's federal law against it, and so supposedly that got rid of it. But there are just many ways that they fraudulently ship or broker patients to all kinds of different facilities. And the main hook is that they give money to the patients themselves. So these are patients with commercial insurance. They cut them in on the revenue, if you will, which is just, all kinds of illegal, specifically illegal, but it's just, right? Imagine if a patient came in and said, well, I was thinking about having eye surgery, but what do you give me to work on my eyes? And that's really what it is.
Right.
And these patients go from facility to facility because the beginning of the stay is the most highly compensated, the detox stage. And they're very hard to detect, the patients. They give off some clues. We're starting to piece it together. But this winds up being very expensive, not just in terms of money for the treatment centers and for the insurance companies, but because then they have to change their reimbursement mechanisms to ferret out these patients, which winds up hurting the legitimate patients who are there. So they get shortened stays and all sorts of prior authorization scrutiny, and it makes it difficult for the people who, you asked a question about how do you know, okay, let's say we find somebody, this guy should go to treatment. He goes to treatment and he gets kicked out, not because he doesn't belong there or shouldn't be there, but because overall the insurance company payout profile has gotten them into the red because of this shady practice. So yeah, it isn't just a question of stigma. It isn't just a question of getting people to get in. There's other barriers. There's other challenges. So Yeah, well, I'm hopeful that there's big changes happening in Washington. We have a new Health and Human Services director who I think his heart is totally in the right place. I think he's gets it, understands this problem maybe better than anyone in that seat ever has, and because of his personal experience and personal history. And I am all the conferences I'm going to this conference season, everyone's anxious about that. What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen with the reimbursement? We have pressure on Medicaid. Uh, I think I'm usually not political, but I'm gonna say I think it's a good idea for people to have to work to get federal or state benefits. I think that is, it's not punishment. It's not something that they're um, forced to do. It's actually good for them. It's good for people to be productive. It's good for people to be of service to others in some capacity, whatever that is. It's
Mhm.
bad for people to be only on the receiving end of I don't know, benefits if they can contribute in some other way. Now, if you can't,
Absolutely.
if you're incapacitated, I mean, that's a different story. If you
Right.
truly can't, but I think the fraction of people who can't in some way contribute is very small. I think most people can do something, and I think it would be good for them. You feel better about yourself, uh, even if you're bobbing along on benefits. That's okay. Our country is very generous. But what'd you do this week? Oh, well, I helped these people doing this, or I did this work, and having that sense of efficacy and integration and part of the community rather than just living on the community, I think is going to be really good for people. So I think that's there's a lot of marketing about how it's cruel and these people are forced to go to work, and it's like, well, the rest of us are. I mean, the rest of us are too. So
Amen. We
right.
can't.
So
Right.
anyhow, I don't want to get
Exactly.
too much into that,
But
but
it's true.
I think it's good. Listen, you'd be surprised. So a big key to getting better, you may not think this is going to work. You may think your story is different. You may think you're special or especially bad and can't be helped. It doesn't matter what you think. It matters what you do. So if you we say in recovery, have smart feet, right? So you may not want to go to the meetings. You may not want to go talk to your man of the cloth or woman of the cloth. You may not want to ask for help. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you do. If you behave as if you belong, if you act as if there's hope for you, guess what happens, right? When you ask, you will receive. But it doesn't say sit and think about asking, or imagine that they, wait for them to ask you. That's not what the proverb says. So you have to ask. And
But
I think you'll
everyone
be a
thinks they're special,
yeah,
that
everyone thinks they're
their
special.
situation is unique, or, I mean,
Yes, just like
Well,
everybody else.
and then
But
there's the oprahification problem where, if you just meditate properly, the universe will pay you back. And I'm like,
mm,
okay, what about all those children in sub-Saharan Africa? Are they just jerks that the universe hates? I mean, you can kind of dismantle that BS so quickly it's not even funny. It's
yeah,
100%. If you don't feel like you're loving your wife, just do loving things for her, and the feelings will come. If you
precisely.
don't feel like you're fit, just do what fit people do. If you don't feel rich, just do what rich people do. Eventually, you'll be rich. I mean,
Yes,
it's just unbelievable. We're made for community. We are made for accountability. We're made for these things. We have to plug back into it. And this is one of the most damaging things that's happened in the last 5 years, was disconnecting people from each other. I mean, no
yeah,
wonder substance abuse went through the roof. You have to have communities. We are the
yeah,
most communal animal in the world, and
for
and
sure.
and so it's there. One more question I want to ask about rehab,
Mhm.
though, which I find really super interesting. How much in the book The Power of Habit, he talks about how habits are not kicked, they're replaced. So
Yes,
it's the replacement theory. So
yes,
so Alice Cooper replaced drinking with golf,
yes.
and and I was packing a parachute with a guy, and he goes, dude, I used to shoot heroin 3 or 4 times a day. Now I just do this. And he goes, I can't
Right.
do anything. I can't smoke a cigarette. I can't drink a beer. I can't do anything, but I can jump out of an airplane and then I'm perfectly fine. And I go, more power to you, buddy.
I don't get that. An airplane that's not on fire, why you would jump out of it?
So,
But,
but it's, so did you replace something?
yes, I did. I think you're talking about Charles Duhigg's book. I think it's exactly right. I think so. That loop that he talks about is that there's a prompt, there's a feeling that something's not right, something's disconnected, something I don't like this, and so we grab the thing that changes the way we feel, and then we feel okay, right? So if you're feeling nervous going to a party, you grab a drink, and then you're less anxious because it's a little bit sedating. And then you feel good at the party. But there's something else you could grab, which is a conversation. You could grab learning how to make small talk at a party, right? Learning how, because it's a skill. You learn how to do that, so there's not so overwhelming. You could grab the habit of feeling okay about yourself. You could grab a text message to another sober person and say, listen, I'm at a party and I'm feeling like having a drink. And just by getting that out of your own head to another person, that confession, if you will, it takes all the sting and excitement out of it. It's not so, you don't need a drink now because you've expressed this community and connection with another human being. So there are a lot of other things you could do. For me, it was getting involved in the recovery movement. So I got involved in that. And then I could see that I was just another pilgrim. I was just another guy with this particular problem. And then it turns out all of literally the stupidest, most, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Those things turned out to be the most useful for the new guys coming through. No one cares about my MD, right? No one cares about Berkeley and my accomplishments. No one cared about that at all. They cared a lot about the absolutely ridiculous, stupid things I did behind trying to deal with the way I felt, because they could relate to that. And so the stuff that I thought was crap turned out to be fertilizer. Mm-hmm. It turned out to be really, really good. And so that just ties into the, wait a minute, what else am I mistaken about? What other aspects of myself can I not see clearly? And maybe I'm not worthless and washed up and useless and so forth. Maybe I'm not special even. Maybe the way that I do this is kind of the same way everyone else does. So I got hooked on the good feelings of being part of a group of men, because my thing was to be around other guys, of other men who were trying to make their lives better. So I replaced the hiding out, secret double life, secrecy, all that stuff with this candor and connection. And I've always felt good leaving a meeting. I never wanted to trade problems with anybody. So whatever was bugging me when I left, I'm like, yeah, actually, this is not so bad. I'll take the challenges that I have. I don't want that guy's challenges. So I got hooked on that. I got hooked on exercise. I think that's really key for early stage and maybe middle, and definitely for me, late stage recovery. I sleep better. I feel better. My family looks at me and regards me better, being in shape. They feel safe. Doesn't hurt to have your wife look at you amorously when you're married this long.
Yes,
all that stuff is really good. And so, and it's something that I can control, and it's something that takes a long time to produce results, like more than minutes. It takes hours at least, or days, or maybe strings of days. And so it's something that discipline and routine and consistency is rewarded. So that's something that I replaced it with. And then I've replaced it with my my career, right? So my career is about helping people with this problem. And now I think about it obsessively. I've written a couple of books about it. I've got another one I'm working on. I think about this problem not in the context of it being a medical thing, but I think, well, why do we? This is a much deeper conversation. Well, why do we still have it? If this is so lethal and bad and separates you from community, why haven't we evolved out of it? Why is it still a permanent, it seems, part of our existence as human beings? is the misapplication of routine or habits or substances. And I think when my short answer is when we're in those kind of crazy states, we take risks. And in taking the risks, even if it's to keep the cover story going or to, try to get the thing that we're after, in that risk taking, we grow. We actually uncover new possibilities as a species. And so long as the guy exploring these new vistas isn't killed, then they're right. Like, what is that grumbling noise inside that cave? Let's go find out. Let's get a spear and go find out. Oh, there's a very big tiger. Maybe we shouldn't have gone in there. But eventually you'll figure out how to get rid of tigers, and eventually you'll be able to figure out how to live in caves, just to torture this example. And so there's a reason that we pursue these things into misery and pain and maybe awareness. I think there's a spiritual dimension to it, and I think there's an evolutionary dimension to it. And that's why I don't think it's ever going to go away. I also don't think it's abnormal. If you talk long enough to somebody and get close enough to somebody, this story is in there somehow, somehow. Not with fentanyl necessarily, or even with whiskey, but there's some over-reliance on something external to make them feel okay. I think that's part of human nature.
I think you are 100% correct. And we've talked about this numerous times. For at least me, at least from my perspective, I think so much of this is like spiritual brokenness. Like when you look at even the entire healthcare system and how no one is supposed to die when everyone dies. Yet, I had a 91-year-old that had a cardiac stent put in. And then a complication from that. Well, of course he's going to have a complication. He's 91 years old. Like, what are you doing? Or, I see people that are 95 years old on statins. And I'm like, what are you trying to prevent?
Right.
Like, if you were cheese, you're so far past your expiration date, we'd have long thrown you away. If May and I have had this discussion already. It's like, once you're past 80, that's like you won the free game on the pinball machine. You're in bonus time at that point. But
that's what Socrates said. Socrates said, if you're old, you have achieved your life's goal, which was when you're young, not to die, right? Your goal is to live a full life. And then you don't see a lot of 80-year-olds high-fiving each other about having made it.
No, it's so weird. Like it really is bizarre. And I think, if you're awake from a common sense and a spiritual perspective, you go, you know what? I did all the stuff. I interviewed my parents before they died, which was wonderful. Now I can't find the recording, which has driven me completely nuts because this was probably close to 10 years ago. And I just asked them, it's like, what do you regret? Is there anything that you've wanted to do that you didn't want to do? Like, did you want to go to Antarctica and you didn't go there or whatever? And it was absolutely revealing because they had really good lives. They raised really cool kids. My dad had an amazing career. My mother was involved in all sorts of different volunteer things or whatever. And it's like, I just looked at him and I go, you won. Like, if there's an award, a lifetime achievement award for being cool, you get it. Don't worry about anything now. Like, and yet somehow, there's a million doctor visits and it's just on and on and on. And I'm like, no. You're done. You're on bonus time. Do whatever you want. You've reached you have reached the whiskey and camels stage.
Right. Smoke them if you got them. Yeah. Exactly. And well, I think that we're supposed to be continually growing and continually striving, but it's a question of what, right? To what? And
yes.
I think there's a Chip Conley. Have you read his stuff about middle age? Great stuff. No one teaches us how to, not accusing you guys of being middle aged, but Chip Conley talks about, we're kids, we try to get into our early training and then into adulthood, and that's it. We don't have commencement for middle age, just a slow decline toward the grave. But this stage in your 35 to 75 range is the most productive in your life. It's when you know stuff, make fewer mistakes, you've got a lot more efficiency. There's stuff you don't tangle with because it's a waste of time. And but we don't. There actually has a school for this. It's sort of a new thing, but we don't spend much time thinking about what am I going to do with this longest stage of my life, this adult stage. Now our kids have gone on, they're finished with school, they moved on. And so my wife and I are in that stage. What do we, which is, by the way, fantastic.
Yeah.
It's not the empty nest. It's that we're free birds.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think the reason I make it up is we should be striving towards something, and maybe it's toward an even better life in middle age, or even better life as a senior, or even better life at the end of life.
Yes.
And my mom is in her mid 80s. My father-in-law is almost 90, and it's not a question of what business are you going to build, or what's the Antarctica trip going to be like. There's different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a lot of it is being able to accept the fact that you did win, right? You did make it. You made it this time. You created these human beings. You participated in the world in one of its most interesting stages. And maybe that's enough, right? Do you need a peg tube to stay alive for 6 more weeks in order to?
Please no.
I don't think so. I don't think that's good for people. And to bring it back to us, I think this is a big part of this is on the physicians. I think physicians in general were terrible at having this conversation, and saying there is no reasonable chance for the quality of life that you want past this point, and we're bad at that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't throw in the towel. We don't like having that conversation. It's as you said before about the drinking. It cuts close to home. We don't want to think that we're all facing that eventually. So we pretend that we can put a stent in and fix the problem, but you can't stent this problem.
That's great. I think we should close on the quote of the great philosopher Gene Simmons from KISS. And he brought home the first time they got a big record deal, he got a check for $10 million. So this would have been, in the late 70s. He took the check to his mother, his Jewish mother, and he shows her, and she's a Hungarian Jew. Look what I did, Mom. I made it. I made this money. And she grabs him by the face and slaps him on the cheek, and she goes, "Now, Jeannie, what are you going to do next?" And that completely changed his life. He's like, it's not about arriving. It's about the journey. It's about achieving goals. It's about having something to strive for. And
good mother.
Yeah. And we all need a Hungarian Jewish mother at times, I think.
For sure.
And so, this has been a tremendous conversation, so helpful in so many ways. Whether you're striving for the next part of your life or for sobriety, I mean, there's so much rich wisdom in this. To button this up, where can people find you as far as your books?
Substack, that's where I'm hanging out most, is on Substack. So Dr. Jason Giles on Substack. And I'm a bit of an old dog on these things. I've not fully dived in past maybe the first step of the kiddie pool on social media. I'm just intrinsically averse to it, but I recognize this is social media. Honestly, is talking this way. So I have to broaden my horizons on that. But yeah, you can find me on all the podcasts. There's several other ones, and Substack is where I'm musing about some of these things we talked about what is addiction, how do we fix it more broadly, and I love to interact with people there too.
Outstanding.
Wonderful. We'll put those links in the show notes, and thanks for sharing your personal story, your journey, and some tips on sort of what not to do, how to help people. And I just hope that people who are thinking about this or know somebody in their family that might need help, reach out, check out those resources as well. And they can always reach out to us or you for more help if needed. So, hey, everybody, remember, recovery isn't about being perfect. It's about being real and being real with people. And that's what we appreciate about you. So thanks again for being here.
My pleasure.
As always, everybody, this is BS Free MD. And until next time, stay honest, stay hopeful, and never stop fighting for not just freedom, but for the truth.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, May. Thanks, Tim.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.